You and your team who did such a wonderful job to bring this book to fruition in over quite a short period of time. We worked very hard, the team worked very hard with us to edit some 20 chapters and produce such a magnificent result. I will speak very for 15 minutes at most about Sam, about his book, and then pass on to the microphone to our commentators. The first comment is that it is a book that is the result of a tricontinental collaborative effort in line with Sam's own approach over many years. He is one of the protagonists over the last 20 years of tricontinental collaboration, so our tribute to him could not have been otherwise. So in this book we have contributors from all three continents and as well as the north, his close friends and colleagues from the north. Many are here. I don't want to read the full list, but apart from the editors, Professor Praveen, Patnaik, Zorzi, Jayati, Chandru, yeah, I think I don't see anyone else. Sandeep, Lisa, sorry. Yeah, of course, Dinesh and Archana. Who else? Where? Alamitra. Oh, here you go. Sorry. So yes, about maybe half of our contributors are here, thankfully. Thank you to all of you that have made this possible and have honored Sam in this way. Of course, Sam was snatched away from us 5 years ago here in New Delhi. We mourned his loss and celebrated his life and paid tribute to his work. We held a conference in his name in 2018 here, which was a stepping stone to this book. And this is some of our debates and some of the papers presented finally made it into the book. We also had a special issue of the journal in 2016 dedicated to Sam, and also some of the articles were published in this book. The book is in 3 parts, or has 3 parts to it. The first is dedicated to his epistemic vision and contributions. It starts out with an chapter by Exozi, who was one of his closest collaborators at Codesvia in Africa, and so many others. Again, I won't read through all the names, but basically this section highlights a number of Sam's contributions and makes it very clear that Sam had a very holistic vision of the social sciences. There was no issue that Sam would not be interested in and would not detain him. So he was very, even though he had his own priorities and emphasis that he gave always to the particularly in labor and agrarian questions, there was issues of social movement, state, national questions, everything, environment, everything came under scrutiny. So that is something I personally learned from Sam, that as social scientists we cannot simply study a small thing or one issue. We have the obligation to address a whole range of issues, even if we have a certain specialization in a certain area. The second section of the book is entitled Land, Agrarian, and Labor Questions, which again was his main area of specialization. And we have articles on all 3 continents. The final section is unfinished dialogues on revolution and liberation. And really, it comes out that Sam really had dialogue with so many people, which weren't finished. And in this section, Sam's friends and colleagues and comrades take these dialogues forward. To us who knew Sam and worked closely over so many years, we knew that this work of art was larger than the sum of its parts. Sam was engaged in a much bigger lifelong project, which was to transform the social sciences, and hence the title of the book. Sam cannot just be remembered as a land expert. He must be recognized as someone who had a very broad grasp of issues and who had a mission to transform the social sciences. He took from his predecessors, I will briefly speak on that as well, the conviction that the social sciences have to go through a process of indigenization, to use Archie Mafege's words. Archie Mafege was one of his principal mentors that he actually acknowledged as his mentor. Indigenization of the social sciences meant making the social sciences relevant to our societies, consistent with the struggles for national and regional liberation. So Sam was clear that the social sciences, to serve our societies, needed to be transformed. He was also, so his contribution stemmed from his own intellectual formation. He was heir to the Pan-Africanist tradition, which in the early post-war and early post-independence period made new leaps in rethinking African history, rethinking African and world history together by appropriating principles of political economy on their own terms, and the tradition's own terms. In this, they came into conflict with the prevailing Eurocentric canon, the economistic canon, exactly in the same manner in which Professor Mustafa Naik has done today. His intellectual formation, he received his baptism of fire, as we call it, in the 1970s in West Africa, among luminaries such as Cheikh Anta Diop, Samir Amin, and many others who were, over those years, 70s and early 80s, engaged in the building of CODESRIA, which is the Council for the Development of Social Sciences, of Social Science Research in Africa. So Abdallah Boujra, Tandika Mkandawiri, some of these you know, Zain Tadesse, Archie Mafeje, Mahmoud Mamdani, and so many others. Sam straddled two generations of Pan-Africanist scholars. The first, he was part of the second generation, not those immediately after the independence. He was trained by them and also participated very actively in the third generation, which was committed to building and defending the institutions built in the first period in Africa. So Sam straddled the second and the third generation and matured intellectually precisely in the late 70s, early 80s, when structural adjustment programs and neoliberalism were launching a new assault on Africans on the continent and on the liberation project. So at that time, Sam became a protagonist with so many others in formulating critiques of structural adjustment, of neoliberalism, taking this approach, scrutinizing its principles, its methods, its results, producing new research to counter this onslaught. And this was all done mainly through CODESRIA, which was his source always, until the end, his source of strength. In the 90s, there was also a confrontation with the culturalist turn, which threatened to unwind the epistemological gains of independence. And Sam remained very critical of the culturalist approach to Africa's problems. He led and participated with many others in rearguard struggles to defend the institutions already constructed, as well as vanguard struggles to build new institutions and take the project ahead. He was a pillar, in Tulika, in Kandavir's word, he was a pillar of the institutional infrastructure of African social science. As far as the institutions that he participated in actively or founded, of course, the Kodishria was, as I mentioned, a source of strength against intellectual isolation. Kodishria was actually born by intellectuals who were exiles and were isolated in nature, by nature, and he found his source of strength always in that. He was not always recognized in so many places around the world. Of course, his radical mind would not be so easily accepted. He eventually became vice president of Auditorium and its president in the 2000s. But in the 1980s, when he returned to Zimbabwe at independence, he participated very actively in the founding and development of the Zimbabwe Institute of Development Studies. He also founded the Zimbabwe Regional Environmental Organization, ZERO, in the 90s. He also, in the 90s, participated actively. He was the director of the postgraduate program at the Southern Africa Research Institute for Policy Studies, until founding his own institute, the African Institute for Agrarian Studies, in 2002, which itself was an act of resistance, given by that time the agrarian question as such was seemed to be passé, something that did not need to be resolved in any particular way. It had been resolved by globalization. So Sam banked everything and he founded an institute precisely devoted to the agrarian question at that moment. Sam was, as if all this, building institutions in Zimbabwe and defending and building in Africa were not enough for one lifetime. He went on to build institutions with a South-South format and perspective. This was launched again from Kodishria, together with a Latin American counterpart, Plaxo, and others from Asia at that time. They organized the first great South-South collaborative program in meetings in Buenos Aires and Havana, Cuba. And that was in the 2000s. That was the first major effort to rebuild South-South alliances in knowledge production. And Sam was one of the two key people in that. On the basis of all this, he also participated in Samir Amin's World Forum for Alternatives, Third World Forum. So he was very much involved in these networks and these initiatives for a long time. So this is all the backdrop to a new initiative which was undertaken in the 2000s in alliance with Issa Shiji initially, who was very a close comrade and was already involved with Sam in debates on agrarian questions and land questions. Eventually, a summer school was created, which was a tricontinental summer school, which became the basis of the Agrarian South Network. The network, 3 years later, the summer school began in 2009 and runs to this day without interruption. The journal that was born of the summer school was founded in 2012 and was published by Sage. And by all these efforts, Sam began to realize his mission to make it real, the tricontinental solidarity that he knew was essential for the transformation of the social sciences. So, briefly, I mentioned that he had this holistic vision of the social sciences, His center of gravity were always the issues that were very particular to Africa in the South, so land, agrarian, and labor questions. He had many influences. He acknowledged mostly Archie Mafeji, but Samir Amin had a clear mark on his thought, Issa Shiji as well. As well as feminist scholars in Zimbabwe and Rhodesia who also nudged him along to develop his own thoughts on gender relations, and which he did over time in various publications in a recurrent way. Sam was Zimbabwe's greatest intellectual. There's no one who compares with Sam. He developed a critique of settler capitalism, thus his early understanding of the land question, and he defended land reform from the beginning, and of course was the main defender of land reform when it actually happened from 2000 onwards. One of his greatest contributions came in the 2000s, apart from his work with the team at the African Institute for Agrarian Studies, Walter and so many others, who produced systematically over the 2000s important research. They were the only real institute and group of researchers that were producing data on the ground from several provinces in Zimbabwe on the land reform that was occurring. Even though that work has also not been recognized as the main body of thought on the Zimbabwe land reform. Or perhaps today, in fact, its results have now been accepted, but you still hardly ever see it cited. Citations always go to some British scholar or other person who crossed the path at some point. But apart from that, he also made a contribution to the study of the continent as a whole. He had inherited the distinction that Samir Amin had made much earlier in the 70s of the three macro regions in Africa, which included the settler south, the peasant economies of the west, and the extractivist concessionary economies of Central Africa. And he was keen on, he was very focused on changes on the land question, and he was the first one to realize, along with Issa Shiji and others, that real changes were happening in land concentration, even in non-settler Africa. Throughout the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. And he was challenged by Archie Mafeji, who did not believe that this was happening. He was challenged to show it empirically, and he did this in 2008 when a book was published exactly on this issue, on land concentration in Africa. And this was a precursor, which again is not recognized as such, a precursor to all the land grab literature that came afterwards. Today it's a big publishing industry, the land grabbing and so forth. But Sam had clearly an established position and a developed position, a mature position on what was happening in Africa before all this happened. In the collaborative efforts, we developed a series of books. We organized a series of books, starting with the agrarian question and rural movements in the agrarian question. That we started reclaiming the land at a time when, again, the agrarian question was seen as passé. We actually we made it a point to show that if academia and policymakers were treating it as passé, the rural movements themselves were not. And in fact, there was a growth and proliferation of rural movements throughout the 80s and 90s, and our book was published in 2005. Another book that came soon after, 6 years later in 2011, was on the national question we call it Reclaiming the Nation. Again, it was a transcontinental collaborative effort to understand, to compare and trace the trajectories of certain nationalisms that were, again, on the rise. We had the Venezuela, we had Zimbabwe, Bolivia, and so forth, possibly Nepal at that time. It was still a question, it was ongoing. But there were clearly new nationalisms, radical nationalisms cropping up, together with a number of other situations across the South. So this was called Reclaiming the Nation. It was published in 2011. And finally, a book that came out posthumously, but which had started in 2011, Reclaiming Africa. It came out last year, which was focused on land grabs, the big land grabs of more recent years. Yeah. So we call this the Reclaiming Trilogy, and that is now done. And together with, so the network has grown, together with the journal, together with the summer schools, together with these publications, has grown and matured into a very robust association, which maintains an informal format, but yet attracts recurrently all of us and so many other youngsters that today are coming on board. It is, in fact, probably the only organization, transcontinental association that continues to function and sustain itself in such a dynamic way today in the world. So, to close, some of the issues we decided to finish or to develop the book in terms of some principles of epistemic sovereignty, as we call it, that emerge from Sam's lifelong work. First, Sam never really made a distinction, and he did not embody in any way a distinction between a type of, first of all, organic intellectual who only does work on the ground, and a universalist intellectual who only thinks about world issues. Sam embodied both of these synthesized at the same time. He also, even though he had a critique of the culture of this term, he was able to combine political economy with analysis of representation and discourse in the Marxist tradition, in the critique of political economy, by demystifying concepts and theories and notions, particularly related to settler colonial Zimbabwe, but in so many other contexts. So he had in his vocation constantly a demystification of received canon in the social sciences. So that was his, so he engaged in discourse analysis on these terms, which were his terms. Epistemic sovereignty, we surmise from this whole experience that it's more than academic freedom, which is, refers to the freedom of expression in universities. And it's more than just epistemic freedom, as today it's being thought by some scholars. It requires a focus on material conditions of knowledge production. Knowledge production requires the establishment of autonomous, viable scientific infrastructure in our countries. We cannot think of transforming the social sciences in any other way. It requires publicly and adequately funded centers of higher learning. Sam suffered with a lack of funding, suffered with deteriorating conditions within the University of Zimbabwe, which he had to leave. So it is difficult. He lived this experience very closely. And he also was very clear that we needed to break the monopolies in the publication industry. So that's one aspect, the control of the material conditions of our knowledge production. His struggle for, so the struggle for the indigenization of the social sciences entailed anchoring our knowledge production in material realities and conducting comparative and collaborative research. It is also on this basis, the basis of solid South-South solidarity, the strong bridges Sam always felt had to be built with scholarship in the North. Engaging in the North had to be a South-South effort. Sam's rare feat was to establish the conditions for a tricontinental solidarity whose center of gravity remained in Africa. And to close, perhaps his even greater feat was to put all this into motion without making personal enemies, hardly any personal enemies. One might recall Engels' eulogy to Marx at his graveside. I make bold to say that though he may have had many opponents, he had hardly one personal enemy. And that certainly applies to Sam. May he rest in peace.